change. Mobile phone adoption in Africa accelerated at 30% compound annual growth between 2000 and 2010. And the market sees no sign of slowing down, with the continent's smartphone market expected to double in the next 4 years. Joining us now to explain more about this revolution is Ian Duvenage, who is head of ICT for Africa at Frost & Sullivan. Ian, we know this is a big revolution. Just how big really is it, and how long can this rate of growth continue?
I think if we look at some of the countries and the actual penetration rate in them, which is still very, very low in Africa, I think there's still massive scope for growth. We're seeing influx of obviously investment in Africa. So there is money floating around. The economies are growing, and the middle class is growing. So there's definitely operators are starting to get smarter in how they interact with the consumer as well. So we definitely expect that to last for quite a while.
You mentioned major growth there. We know voice has reached its peak, so to speak. The big revenue drivers are data now. Where else could we see more innovation coming from?
Voice has reached its peak, although not in actual numbers, maybe in the revenue. So the revenue is dropping, but the actual usage of it is still increasing. And that obviously in revenue terms, it's decreasing for the operators. Content and video consumption on the data side is definitely driving it, and in Africa we're seeing that quite a bit because of the language and the other content not being available. We're seeing videos being almost user generated, and that drives a lot of the demand. And then just basic social media. Social media in Africa has obviously grown phenomenally, and we've seen in a few countries with revolutions happening.
Looking at the African experience, I mean, this is the kind of almost like a gold rush, isn't it? I mean, companies want to really get into this rushing. What are the possible catches down the line here, where you might get companies saying, you know, we didn't pick up or we didn't pay enough attention to that trend, and therefore we made mistakes in our investment?
In infrastructure expansion at the moment, I think because there's a lot of focus on consumer pricing and trying to get so many people in, so everyone's just laying down infrastructure, that it's almost asked the question, is that money going to run out? Is because we're driving revenue down and the consumer pricing, trying to get it to such a level that we get more people on, is there enough investment still going into infrastructure, getting quality of service up so that we are competitive?
Carry on.
Just on that infrastructure, are we seeing enough of that? Because we know that broadband penetration on the African continent is a challenge, and with the infrastructure, there's a change in technologies constantly. I mean, we went from ADSL to 3G, and now there's the latest 4G LTE technology. So is that sustainable to continually reinvest in infrastructure development?
It is probably critical for Africa to still get onto almost just a decent playing field, so that we have proper connectivity, we have high enough speeds that you can use video on demand, you can use some of the advanced services. Because it's so remote and so many companies from outside of Africa starting to transact here, corporates are starting to almost require that as base connectivity, and that then feeds into the communities around it and into the cities, and then consumers start getting used to that speeds.
Looking at the infrastructure, you know, this is one of my little hobby horses on this show and in my life, is that the cell phone networks have this vast reach. They've got all these subscribers, the penetration's over 100%, and they've got all these fancy gadgets, but they can't keep a call. The quality of the lines is poor, and they have dropped calls, which is like having a Ferrari but no petrol. I mean, it's no use. It's not good enough.
Looks nice in your garage.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I know someone who's got a Ferrari, a Porsche, and a Lamborghini. I said, you can only drive one at a time, you know.
Yeah.
But so what about that infrastructure? It's all very well saying that everyone's got a cell phone, but is the quality of the support, the infrastructure, going to be enough to make the promise come true?
It's always a big question on what's enough and what quality of service enough. I think in Africa we're trying to push a reach and make sure more people are using not just basic cellular services, but are starting to use the internet, because that then linked to education, which drives economic growth, drives GDP, and all sorts of other things. So, you know, what level of quality service is enough? There is the odd jobs call. I think in South Africa we're still quite lucky. If you start calling out, it gets a bit tricky.
Just on the maybe convergence that you mentioned earlier, that people want more video on demand, and we know that in the news recently we've had talks between Vodacom as well as Neotel, Vodacom wanting to make use of Naspers' media content. Are we going to see a lot more of that, potentially partnerships taking place between financial institutions and the telecoms?
Definitely. I think in the convergence space there's going to be loads of things happening at the moment, not just in convergence between technology operators, but banks moving into becoming operators themselves, becoming MVNOs. If that starts happening, then you can start seeing real cross-selling between industries, and they'll start challenging the operators on their traditional revenue streams. because they'll then offer mobile payments, for instance, at competitive rates where the mobile operators at the moment just is outpricing themselves.
One sees some protectionism coming up too, in the same way that mining companies, where you have countries saying, hey, all these big foreign mining companies coming in to exploit our riches. In this case, big foreign telecoms companies coming in to exploit our people. And so hang on, we need our own big telecoms companies. And if you think of a Vodacom and an MTN 15 years ago, they hardly existed.
Yeah.
So government's waking up to this and saying, now we need to stimulate local industries in different countries.
Yeah. They're all waking up to it, and I think especially up in Africa, we're seeing government trying to push the whole internet usage. They're making e-government services available, and they're trying to almost use that as the initial in for consumers to start getting used to using how you interact with the internet. So it definitely is pushing it, and there's multiple ways obviously of doing that.